everybody. Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with Seattle's own from the great Pacific Northwest, Sean Fairchild. Yay!
Hello, Raul. Hello, Bass Musician Magazine folks.
So great to finally chat. Sean, we've been talking, I don't know how many times at how many NAMM shows over the last decade.
Been quite a few.
Planning to talk and get together and chat. And even though we're in the same state, we're at kind of different ends, so we don't talk directly. So it's really exciting to finally have a chance to sit down and have a good conversation. So going back to the past, we always like to find out about you. How did you get started in music and on bass?
In music, I got started, well, my mom was a visual artist. She's a painter and a sketcher, and there was really no musicians in my family. So I got really into visual arts at a time. And it's kind of funny, I remember having this poster in my room when I was, like 8 years old or something, and it was some sort of jazz fest poster or something. It had like a neon outline of a guy playing saxophone, and I used to think to myself, I don't ever want to be a musician. That seems like a weird, that's weird. I'm happy to be drawing. So we were living in France at that time, and at some point after moving to Washington in late 1989, I decided I wanted to start playing that saxophone that I saw the neon outline of. Mm-hmm. So I played for a couple of years, but the really kind of odd and cool and serendipitous thing is how I came to bass, which was completely by accident, which I think also probably explains a little bit about the way in which I play it. My folks split up after we moved here to Washington. My dad continued with the work he was doing and went to Japan, so I would go there for summers and visit. And the first summer, this really nice Australian guy named Kerry Dunn gave me a bass that a friend, he was a bass player in a cover band in Tokyo called the Hitmen. And they were all friends. They were friends with my dad, and he said, hey mate, I got this bass here. Oh, sorry, Kerry, if you're watching this. Never mind that. But so somebody had found this bass, which was a Japanese copy of a Gibson EBO, in a dumpster on like a Tokyo alley, and knew that Kerry was a bass player. So they took it and gave it to him, and he just had it sitting around his apartment for who knows how long and was never going to use it. Mm-hmm. So he said, hey kid, you want a bass? And I was like, sure, what's a bass? And so, he gave it to me, and I actually have a photograph of the moment that he gave it to me. Like, he's pulling it out of the case, and I'm sitting on the corner of my bed, actually with my saxophone on, and he's like pulling it out, and he's got it like halfway out, and I think it's so cool because in my mind that's kind of like the definitive moment that I can point back to at which I kind of became a bass player. I was 13. And that was summer of that year, and by winter I was pretty sure I wanted to do that for the rest of my life.
Very cool. And so how did you pursue your training?
I was in school band because of playing saxophone. Mm-hmm. So I kind of it's actually another kind of funny story that could be longer, but I'll condense it. The band director was himself a classical saxophonist. And I was starting to, he had kind of invited me to join this quartet he was doing before school hours, and it was kind of an honor, and I felt like he was kind of a little bit like grooming me in his own image. So he got a little ticked off when I started getting really invested in the bass. And essentially I was kind of just forced out of school band. Like, there just wasn't a place for me, and at that point, there wasn't really like an electric bass chair. And he wasn't too interested in it. So I stopped doing scholastic-based learning then, and then I just started doing a lot of playing by ear, and then later would come to actually study music and teach as well as part of my own teachings. I had a really great teacher who told me that teaching was really important to do because you learn something so much more fully, so much more thoroughly when you have to teach it to somebody else. And he was absolutely right.
Well, and the thing is, that is one of the universal truths in teaching. It makes you actually kind of break down and analyze whatever particular facet you're trying to present and make sense of it, and I think in life there's things that, you could go, well, just because, well, that's not good enough if you're trying to have somebody else learn how to do it.
Right, yeah. What I found is that there's a lot of things that you sort of think that you think that you know is fact, and you don't really question those things because it doesn't come up in daily life. And then when you need to be passing that information on to somebody else, sometimes you realize, like in the process of writing out a lesson plan or something, you realize, is that really true, or do I just think that? Like, did I hear that somewhere, or is that actually the case? And then you have to research it, and you have to be sure. And I've absolutely been wrong about things that I thought I knew, and had to kind of look up and get right before I messed up somebody else.
Absolutely.
So it's really good for that.
Well, and the other part of it, I think, is that with so many things, there's not absolute truths, but musicians, people in general, will decide that something is a certain way. And with education, particularly, there's a lot of things. If you look back at your general education, you go, I learned a lot of stuff I've never used.
Sure.
And I know our son back in the day used to argue with us, like, why do I have to learn algebra? I'm never going to use it. And you kind of go, no, just go with the flow and get your general information. But like with music, if you take like a very classical training approach, it will set you up to do kind of certain things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you couldn't go a whole other approach. And as I talk to so many bass players, I mean, the ranging from the ones that have gone to a conservatory to those that were self-taught, to those that were handed a bass and said, here, you're it, just go. And maybe if they've been doing it for 40 years and it's worked for them, who am I to say, yeah, that was the wrong thing to do, there's not one single truth when it comes to it. But as you're teaching, you can help students maybe avoid some of those, I'll call them the pitfalls, where you go, yeah, you don't necessarily have to do this, but you could do this. And, I know that there's parts, especially when you get down to some of the hardcore, like circle of fifths, well, let's dive into theory. When you've got somebody that wants to play, they get like, oh, I want to play.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're right, and I mean, and a solid knowledge of theory helps everybody, I think.
Yes.
But there is a big difference between a conservatory approach, which, in my mind, is very prescriptive. Its focus is there are right ways to do things, and here's what those ways are. And then a more modern approach, which is the one that I like to take, which is it's more descriptive than prescriptive, and that I think is, in a sort of microcosmic way, I feel like that is the way in which I kind of approach life in general. But certainly the things that I basically tell my students is that I don't really think that there's necessarily a right or wrong way to do something, but if you're doing this thing like that, you may run into this roadblock that you wouldn't run into if you did it this, the other way.
Sure.
And that comes out in numerous ways, such as, styles of slapping, whether you use a free stroke or a rest stroke, and ways that people pluck with their plucking hand fingers, all sorts of things like that. But yeah, I'm very much, I do not take the conservatory tack where it's prescriptive and there's a right way to do everything. And the reason for that is because I feel like every time somebody comes along that really changes the game, somebody like Stanley Clarke, somebody like Victor Wooten, obviously, somebody like Jaco. They, before they were really widely accepted, there was probably a bunch of people that were telling them, you can't play bass like that.
Yeah.
Bass isn't played like that. You shouldn't do this. You're doing that wrong. When you slap, you shouldn't go through the string. When you play fretless, you shouldn't use round wounds. When you play bass, you shouldn't strum chords, all that stuff. So every time that there's somebody who does something like that and gets it to a point to where they kind of really, make an art out of it, they blow us all away, and we're all like, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
You could do that? That's so cool. That wasn't in the rule book. So I don't want to be the person who beats that out of somebody. I don't want to be the person who prevents, the next Stanley Clarke from creating his or her cool techniques.
Oh, totally. Well, and we see so many examples of that. And one that always comes to mind is like Mono Neon. who plays with his fretboard kind of inverted, with the high strings toward him, and it's like
Sure.
you can't argue with his results. That's kind of the bottom line. But
Yes.
getting away from the whole educational process and all that, Combinator, ear goggle fodder. I listened to it last year. It's hard to say, ear goggle fodder.
Hard to say. I picked it because it's just such a hard thing. It's an anti-marketing strategy.
There you go. It's a very interesting piece and has a lot of very interesting characteristics. Tell us a little bit about that project.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Combinator is my artist name. It's the name under which I release music, and Ear Goggle Fodder is a full-length album that came out 1 year ago in 2 days. It came out 363 days ago, and you can stream it everywhere. It's available everywhere. It's a full-length album that kind of, more than I've ever done before, it delves into my weird random thoughts and compositions as a solo musician without being like a solo bass album. There are plenty of bass solos on there, but I'm singing for people who know me and who have seen me at shows or with my own groups. I tend to almost always be the front person. So I really get a lot of satisfaction out of singing that I don't get necessarily from bass playing, even though I consider myself a bassist first. But there wasn't just a central focus on bass playing. It's composition, it's rhythm programming, playing random other instruments. I don't know if it comes through on the frame, but I've got a berimbau over there and a didgeridoo, and that stuff is on the album, and talkbox and all kinds of fun stuff. So yeah, I really feel proud of it. I think it was a major accomplishment. It's something that helped give me some focus and got me through, the worst of the pandemic shutdown, lockdown times. And I think the mood of the album kind of also reflects that. It's a little bit mysterious. It's a little bit dark. It's a little bit probing and swirling and I don't know what other adjectives somebody would use to describe it. But yeah, I'm really proud of it. I hope people give it a listen if they haven't yet.
Gotcha. Well, and I found it to be, I'll say, optimistic and positive in the same breath. And with the way that the collaboration happened, the way that you worked, because you've got other musicians, all of that coming together under these circumstances is a great example of what can be done in spite of kind of everything else. And it's certainly for people that listen to it, it's not like just a blues album where you're just all down and mopey and sad and
That's true.
I can't leave my house blues. No, it's really kind of a pick-me-up. And I think from a transcendental point of view, as time goes by, people that listen to it may not recognize that it is a pandemic piece because it has just that universal kind of trait and characteristic to it.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. I consciously wanted to weave an emotional journey through the tracks of the album. So the kind of subtext about the album is, doubt and unsureness and not knowing kind of what to do with your life and how to spend your life, how your life is spent, what the point of sort of doing anything is at the beginning. And then there's sort of like a calm that happens towards the middle of the album. And then things start to pick up a little bit more, and the emotions, I thought about it more in terms of emotional content, and it was sort of confusion and chaos and stress and an eventual sort of calming, and then a gradual belief in self, in the self, in oneself, and in greater pride, I suppose, and self-assuredness. And that's kind of the way that it ends, in my mind. That's kind of the emotional level at which it leads you.
I tend to respond, I think, emotionally to music. One of my downsides, I don't listen as much to lyrics. It's what's happening in the patterns and the notes and all that. And I came out feeling really positive and stoked about it. So again, if that was what was supposed to happen, that's what happened. Now, talking about your sound specifically, and you've got a beautiful array of instruments behind you, tell us about your gear. How are you getting your sound?
Boy, that's a good question, or that's a good topic anyways. I have a really kind of non-standard approach to playing bass, as somebody who listens to the album will hear. I use a lot of flamenco guitar techniques. I do a lot of like four finger, I call it, I think of it as quad slapping, but really just the sort of stuff that Tosin Abasi and Victor Wooten have made popular, both on guitar and bass respectively. I'm using double thumb strokes and various fingers, so I require kind of weird stuff. So I'm using these Michael Tobias design basses. 3 of these are those. That is sort of the Combinator custom that was made for me sort of in celebration of this album. The color scheme sort of matches the album cover, and its inlays are based on this tattoo and everything. This bass over here is one that I made in high school when I was interning with Dave Bunker of Bunker Guitars.
Wow.
And the rest are MTDs. And the reason that they work really well for me is that they are very, very solid platforms that allow me to experiment with different things. So the first one that I got, for instance, didn't have a ramp. I wasn't into using any kind of ramp when I play or assistance when I play, but I found that it's something that, there was value in for me. So I have slap ramps now on all of them, and they are very clear basses. The way that the pickups are wound is kind of unique. The pickups, they're low impedance, which means they have, well, among other things, as a byproduct of being low impedance, they have fewer turns of wire around them, which gives them a flatter frequency response. Mm-hmm. So I'm somebody who likes to use onboard EQ to really sculpt different kinds of tones. These basses let me do that. So they allow me to be whoever I feel like I need to be or whatever I need to explore at the time, which is really important to me. And I pretty much only am interested in instruments that let me do that. I love the sound of a Stingray. It's one of my favorite bass sounds in recorded history, but I've never owned one because a Stingray is always going to sound like a Stingray.
Yeah.
And that's, that it's just baked into it, and it's an awesome sound. But I'm not somebody who likes to have a lot of different instruments. I tend to bond really closely with them in a very personal way. So I like to have 1 or 2 main players that can do just about everything that I want. So the MTDs are the best basses for me, at least right now, that I've found to let me do that.
And pickup-wise, you've got Bartolinis on those, don't you?
Yep, that's right. In fact, the Bartolinis are standard on the MTD US basses, and they have a special proprietary pickup that I was just describing that's kind of a low impedance thing that goes into a buffer. However, in this guy right now, which I call Nightfall, I'm not sure. There's my finger.
There he is.
I've got a pair of custom Bartolinis that they wound for me, and they're called the M56 CBJD3. It's not anything too fancy or custom, honestly. It's their split inline jazz pickup with a bright coil winding in an M5 shape and move towards the bridge side of the pickup cover. That's a lot of information, but it basically means it's roughly a split hum cancel jazz bass sort of configuration, but with both pickups a little bit closer to the bridge.
Very nice, very nice. And as we move down your sound chain, I'm seeing Gensler amplification all around you.
Yes, indeed. Yep, I'm lucky to have a great relationship with Jeff Gensler. Jeff and Scott, who run Gensler Amplification, are great people to work with, and I really like these bass array speaker cabinets, which are really built a lot like PA speakers, to be honest. They have vertical arrays of paper cone drivers rather than tweeters. And they don't sound like any other bass cabinets out there. They're really high performance machines, which is, I just think it's really cool because I like cool high tech stuff. But they sound great. They sound really even because they have all those little speakers, and they're not like ferrofluid tweeters or compression drivers or anything like that. They sound really even across the whole spectrum that bass guitar produces. So that's something that's important to me. And yeah, I'm lucky to use them.
Nice. And you are playing on 6 strings, kind of. You're in the expanded range, but what kind of strings are you playing?
That's right. Yeah, I use GHS strings, and the ones that I am currently preferring are GHS Super Steels. I started out kind of really liking the contact core version of the GHS Super Steels, and now I'm kind of preferring just the normal Super Steels. The progressives are also very nice, a little bit of a more tamed response, but Super Steels are great. I play really light custom gauges that John at GHS has been very patient with me in figuring out. In fact, I just got a shipment the other day and just put a 50 gauge D string on that 6-string over there. And
Wow.
it's great. It's really nice. I love it because the D string always has an inordinate amount of tension on it. If you look at most string packages, they list the tension. The D string always has the most. It's really kind of an odd thing. So, like I said, I play in a little bit of an odd manner, and I do a lot of bending and things. So I like to try to lower that tension and even things out where possible.
Gotcha.
GHS has been great for that.
Very nice. And one area that often gets overlooked is that connection between your bass and your amps. What kind of cables are you playing on?
That's right. Yeah, Tsunami cables are what I'm using currently, and they're very tough. I am not somebody who has a lot of strict demands on cables. So what I need basically, since I do tend to play active basses, and they're less susceptible to capacitance. What really matters to me is durability, and they've been super durable. And I use a wireless system a lot, so I even have a little Tsunami like 12-inch link cable that goes from my wireless body pack to my bass.
Nice.
They've been great.
Very, very nice. And are there any other elements? I think I've seen you playing with a fret wrap too.
Yep, yeah, no formal relationship there, but I do use fret wraps from time to time. They're really handy to have on, especially if you're playing extended range basses. Yeah, they're a convenient thing when your two hands are busy doing something else and you can't mute everything that you might want to. But yeah, fret wraps have been a great tool. I'm interested in exploring just different tools. I play with picks sometimes. I used to have an EBow sitting right here on my desk, and now I don't know where it is. I like to mess around with different things. I've got a brass slide kicking around here somewhere, so I'm certainly not afraid to try out a bunch of different accoutrements.
There you go. Well, and especially with 6-strings, and it is one of the things, again, you have to have a wider fretboard. A lot of times weight is also more of a consideration, and I know that has been kind of the mother invention in the realm of straps. It's come because of 6-strings. Do you have a preference in straps to be able to handle that kind of weight?
I don't have a massive preference. The straps that I'm using right now I think that most of the ones I've got on there are by Harvest Fine Leather. It's a German company, and they are sold here in the U.S. by a company that I used to do some work with called Access Bags and Cases.
Okay.
They're actually here in Washington, in Kingston. So those are straps that I am preferring right now, but really I don't like something too wide because it has a hard time conforming to the changing shape of my shoulder as I'm moving around and playing and doing my thing. But it also has to be padded. I used to use comfort straps, and they were a little too elastic for me over time. I'm not super picky in the field of straps.
Well, and then last but not least is always the realm of pedals. And that's it could be a very large or a very small rabbit hole, depending which way you want to go. But especially when you were doing a lot of your in-house kind of recording, I'm sure you were using loopers, you had all kinds of stuff going on. Tell us a little bit about your pedal setup.
Sure, yeah, and there is a fun rabbit hole to go down. So I'm looking down at my Helix, my Line 6 Helix floor down here. That's been something that's been a really great tool. In fact, on most gigs that I'm playing right now, I don't take my amps and cabs. I just take the Helix. It's really awesome, but one of the things that was smart that they did is I'm very much into exploring different plugins, and a lot of the work that I do with different sounds is in the box. I work in Ableton Live. The whole album was recorded within Ableton Live and mastered within Ableton Live and processed and edited, everything. I love that platform. Ableton has its own great plugins, but one of the really smart things that Line 6 did is they created a digital representation of the Helix that is so completely analogous that you can actually save presets between the two. So it's like it's a digital version of your Helix. And it's an extra cost. If you're a Helix owner, it's not very much, and if you don't have a Helix, it's more pricey. Yeah. But it was a really great thing to have during the recording process, because it allowed me to kind of automate different elements of tones that I was using, via MIDI signals, like while the track was progressing. So I could have different things turn on and turn off automatically, and sort of virtual knobs get turned and twisted. So Helix Native was really great to have for that. I also use Bias Effects 2, which unfortunately I'm having some trouble with lately, but it has some great sounds in there. Mm-hmm. One of the best polyphonic octave up sounds I've ever heard is one of the effects in that program. And then one of the things that I used to use all the time that I kind of rekindled my love for recently, I used to play with a live laptop setup, and now I'm going back to doing that again, to where I'm not really using pedals and just hosting everything through VSTs in a laptop, was Native Instruments Guitar Rig. So I have Guitar Rig 5 Pro, and they just came out with 6, which I don't have yet. But 5 is great and is very guitarist and bassist friendly. The graphical interface looks like the gear, well, it looks like rack versions of the gear that it's supposed to represent. And it's really stable. And yeah, so that's been something that I use a lot too. So a lot of the sounds I use are in the box, and some of those sounds are just in a bigger black box, mainly up for pedals.
Very cool, very cool. Well, and as we're speaking, we're kind of coming to hopefully what we are expecting to be kind of the tail end of the pandemic. We're not out of it yet, but we're seeing tours being announced and things kind of on the horizon. What are your plans for the future?
I have just been putting the final touches, the polishing sort of touches on a new stage show, a new one-person stage show.
Nice.
Really excited about it. And something that my camera doesn't show is that my desk is full of interfaces. Well, not audio interfaces, but human digital interfaces. So here's an Akai pad that I'm actually using as an effects processor rather than a percussion-based sort of input device. So I've got a number of interfaces to control Ableton and control my effects and other stuff going on, and kind of patterning. It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of a guy called Square Pusher, and if any of the viewers out there have not listened to or watched Square Pusher, you really owe it to yourself to go do that immediately. He's a huge inspiration for me, and so I'm kind of a little bit trying to take notes from him and see how I can set up kind of a one-person DJ table, rack gear, controller, sort of setup so that I can do my whole show. And it's great actually. I've broken up all of the tracks on this album, as well as some of my previous albums, into song parts per song by instrument. So I have control of all of those different variable parts with a controller that lets me have tactile control over the launching of those and fader assignments and all kinds of different things. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And in fact, I've got a little bit of a video on YouTube. It's one of my last uploaded videos. So if somebody were to go to my Combinator YouTube channel, within the past 3 or 4 videos, you might see a player's point of view video where I've got my phone on a head thing that I'm wearing, and you're looking down at my desk, my normal work surface, but I'm performing and doing one of the songs on the album in that way, and setting up a bass loop and then controlling things with all these interfaces, and it's pretty exciting. It's been kind of fun to work out. So that's almost ready to go, and I hope to be launching that very soon.
Got you. That track is "Let's Get Drunk and Watch Sci-Fi," isn't it?
That's right.
Okay. I thought I recognized that.
Yep, that is the one.
Perfect. Well, and if people want to know what you're up to and how they might be able to see you once you're able to get this out into the public, where's the best place for them to look?
There is a company called Linktree that has just made all of that much easier. So if somebody were to go to linktr.ee tr.ee, like Linktree, /Combinator. That will send you anywhere you want to go. So that has separate links within it to my Instagram account, my YouTube, Facebook pages, website, Bandcamp pages, all that stuff. Even has links to donate and support, to buy the album, to stream the album from Spotify. You can stream it from right there in the Linktree app. It's a really cool feature set that they offer. So that's a good way to go. Or you can always go to combinatorband.com or seanfairchild.com.
Very cool. Well, Sean, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and certainly sharing your lovely studio and your surroundings with us. Folks, you've seen him here. Sean Fairchild coming to you on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thank you very much, Raul. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you guys for watching.